The battle is won when the average American regards a corporate journalist exactly as they regard a tobacco executive. Welcome to Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone, and the Libertarian Institute. Today I have Sal, the agorist. Sal, where is the best place to find your archive of work and contributions?
SalTheAgorist.com. I try to keep everything under one roof, make it easy for everybody, nice and easy to remember. SalTheAgorist.com.
And Pete Quinones of the Free Man Beyond the Wall podcast, as well as the Libertarian Institute. Pete, where is the best place to find your collection of work?
Two places, libertarianinstitute.org/Free Man Beyond the Wall. And I have a Substack called By Any Memes Necessary.
I love that picture of Malcolm X in your
it's
Substack.
The best. I freaking love it. Yeah.
So Sal's website and Pete's link tree will be in the description below. Today we're going to be discussing a book that was #1 in nonfiction on all of Amazon for a day, the Anarchist Handbook, organized by Michael Malice. Before we get into our top 5 takeaways, Sal, how do you explain anarchism to, what is your elevator pitch to someone who really has either never heard of it or just thinks it involves people throwing trash cans?
The absence of slavery. I try to keep it as simple as possible. It's just the absence of slavery, the absence of initiatory coercion.
Love it. Pete, what is your elevator explanation to someone who has never heard of it?
I got this from the great Ryan Dawson. Just ask him one question. Say, finish this sentence. All politicians are, and wait for the answer.
Excellent. So we are going to go around and discuss our major takeaways from this book. Sal, the agorist, start us off. What's your first major takeaway from the Anarchist Handbook organized by Michael Malice?
Well, the first one I have here is from Stirner, Max Stirner. And this is, I'm not a fan of Stirner. Let me just try to find my notes now that I lost it, of course. Not a very big fan of Stirner. Okay, here we go. So, yeah, I find him generally to be very confusing and ambiguous and vague, and sometimes I get the impression that he's hiding poor ideas behind a cloak of ambiguity. I think if you're going to read Stirner, you should also read Rothbard, read some of Rothbard's critiques of Stirner. So the first thing is that he says that I take issue with is the whole might makes right sort of thing. And I don't know if any of you guys have read Plato, like some of the earlier stuff. I don't know if it's like in the Republic or the Law, but he really takes Thrasymachus to task for this exact belief. So if you want to know why the whole might makes right argument is wrong, read Plato's dialogue with Thrasymachus. The second thing is that he says rights are spooks, right? He thinks that the whole concept of individual rights are spooks, but then he claims this whole philosophy of individualism. So I think that's it's self-contradictory there, unless, of course, I'm sure the Stirnerites will say that I'm misunderstanding him, which, of course, is possible, but I'm not a big fan. Other than that, I'd say he's probably just a poor writer also overall. Even if you wanted to really sit down and take your time and read Stirner and to comprehend him, it's really difficult to understand him. So I guess I would just say those 4 things were my biggest critiques of Stirner.
Pete, first major takeaway of the Anarchist Handbook.
Okay, so Johann Most is a controversial figure. This comes from the Science of Revolutionary Warfare, a little handbook of instruction in the use and preparation of nitroglycerin, dynamite, gun cotton, fulminating mercury, bombs, fuses, poisons, etc., etc. 1883. Pretty cool stuff. So he says that basically what it comes down to in this little short letter is he says, for a violent revolution, even in 1883, weapons had to be examined. People were thinking they had to construct them all by themselves, but they could be bought over the counter. That's what he was basically saying in this letter. He's like, stop trying to build these things and blowing yourself up. Just buy them over the counter. And my big takeaway from it was the Agora will provide. Even if you're not going to get it over the counter and somebody doesn't want to give it to you because you look like a complete psychopath and you might be an anarchist in Chicago in the 1880s, the Agora will provide. You can just go get it from somebody, maybe pay a little more, but there it is. And you don't have to blow yourself up trying to make them.
Excellent takeaway. My first major one is from Malice's introduction, where he says, anarchism is not a location, it's a relationship. So people will say, where has this worked? Give me a geographical area. And then if there's any shortcomings within this geographical area, I pin it on anarchism. Boom, I've dealt with the entire philosophy. Well, that's not exactly a justified way of approaching something like this. When you understand anarchism as a relationship, you can also see that it's not just something we can imagine will happen years from now. We can sort of embrace it in our everyday lives. Does the person who I interact with, whether they're businesses, friends, families, do they treat me as equals, where they realize that I owe them none of my time and everything we do is on a voluntary basis and they appreciate my time? Or do they treat me like shit and feel like, well, they're really entitled to my time, and then they're disrespectful? Once you have this anarchist mindset, the voluntarist mindset, you realize you don't owe anyone any money. You owe them no time. So everything you give them is more or less a gift that you have the right to take away. So it almost really empowers you, both intellectually against the state and in all of your relationships. So that was my first major takeaway. Anarchism is not a location. It's a relationship in which two parties are engaged and no party has the right to rule another. Both have the right to walk away. Sal,
Well,
second. I'm sorry.
Can I jump in with that?
Please.
Berto and I did a episode on Saul Newman's post-anarchism book. It's like 130 pages, something like that. And basically what he said was, he goes, look, considering the world we live in, anarchism is something we're going to experience. And I thought that was, I've said that to people and they've been floored by it. They've been floored by it, and Malice talks about that. He's like, we experience anarchism every day. 90%, 95% of our life is anarchism, is the state's not interfering and we're just voluntarily just interacting with other people. And that Saul Newman's post-anarchism is pretty amazing, and we did an episode on it. And that was an episode. I mean, we've done a lot of episodes I've done a lot of episodes with Bird, and we've talked about Marxism and stuff like that. But I think the post-anarchism one was something that people really understood. And I mean, it's hard to embrace because everybody wants to get to that location of anarchism. But really, what is anarchism? Anarchism is just an interaction. It's how we live our lives and everything.
Excellent. Sal the Agorist, second major takeaway from the Anarchist Handbook.
Well, I guess, so this is maybe more of a question for you guys, but what did you guys think of the whole, the stuff with Bakunin? I don't know how you guys felt about that, but I thought that it was very well written, which is why I was so concerned about it, because I don't know. Maybe you guys can help me out here, but I had been under the impression that Bakunin was really the sort of father of Antifa, the whole father of ideological, like
I don't know,
anarcho-communism, the sort of bomb-throwing kind of media, the way the anarchists are portrayed in the media. But then Malice, that selection doesn't really convey that. And then later on in the book, when I think he's talking about, I think it's Most he's talking about, Pete. I think, but you were talking about earlier. He's was talking about like bombs and stuff like that. And I think Malice attributed the whole propaganda of the deed to Most, whereas as far as I had remembered, Bakunin had came up with this phrase in like his letters to a Frenchman. But I'm sure, Malice is a hell of a lot smarter than I am, and I'm sure he did his research for the book. So I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. I don't know. I was sort of concerned how well written it was, because I was starting to think like, oh man, a lot of these libertarians are going to be reading Bakunin thinking, wow, this guy's so smart. Let's go with his ideas. And then they're going to, like, next thing you know, they're all going to be joining Antifa and stuff like that. So that was the second thing that I noticed.
Well, I guess I can jump into, I had had a section on Bakunin from the state and Marxism and God and the State. That I wanted to talk about. It was a takeaway. So, I mean, you guys mind if I jump in on that?
Please do.
All right. So I'm going to read a portion of it. It said, every logical and sincere theory of the state is essentially founded on the principle of authority. That is to say, on the eminently theological, metaphysical, and political idea that the masses, always incapable of governing themselves, must submit at all times to the benevolent yoke of a wisdom and a justice which in one way or another is imposed on them from above. But imposed in the name of what and by whom? Authority recognized and respected as such by the masses can only have three possible sources: force, religion, and the action of superior intelligence. And the supreme intelligence is always represented by minorities. And I mean, I read that, just that one paragraph, and it described the state so well. It described every state. It seems to describe every state. The theocratic, the democratic, even he's even describing like what would be the anarcho-communist. I mean, really, I mean, when it comes down to it, what is anarcho-communism? It's saying, well, we're all equal and we shouldn't be. I mean, well, isn't that a philosophy? Where does that philosophy come from? I mean, we talk about everybody being an individual and that we should have individual rights. And when you really start getting into Bakunin, I mean, I think Sal's right. It's tough. He can, you read that and he can really turn you. He can turn some people because he is a persuasive, right. I mean, guy had to be brilliant.
Yeah, but you know another thing I noticed too, and I think this was Bakunin, although I'm starting to get hazy which essays I'm recalling it from here, but I think Bakunin said something like, you know, like in other words, like he was blaming again the whole Marxist like fallacy of blaming the capitalist class rather than the political class. So that was another thing that I noticed there as well. But like you said, Pete, they had a lot of disagreements over tactics and strategy, obviously. I mean, the communists are still fighting over it to this day.
Yeah, I got a number from him later, but his essay, more so than anyone else, just blew me away because I wasn't expecting anything. I go, all right, here's the Antifa nonsense. Let's hear it. And it was brilliant. And I go, my God, you poor morons have strayed so far from what could be something great. It's like listening to morons in the LP. It's like you have the philosophy of Hoppe and Rothbard and Rockwell, and you're like, trans lives matter. I mean, that's your major tweet once every 3 days. That's what you focus on.
The difference is in Bakunin's defense, he was in the pre-Rothbardian era, so he didn't have the insights of Rothbard, like, you know, to stand on Rothbard's shoulders.
Exactly. My second big takeaway is the final essay, John Hasness, The Myth of the Rule of Law. So I just love how he opens this up and puts a test to someone. So it sort of puts the onus on them. So it's not like, hey, I have some ideas. I'm going to give them to you. Let me know what you think. He says, I'm going to ask you what you think. He goes, stop. Before reading this article, take the following quiz. The First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States provides, in part, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or press. On the basis of your personal understanding of this sentence's meaning, not your knowledge of constitutional law, please indicate whether you believe the following sentences to be true or false. 1. In a time of war, a federal statute may be passed prohibiting citizens from revealing military secrets to the enemy. 2. The president may issue an executive order prohibiting public criticism of his administration. 3. Congress may pass a law prohibiting museums from exhibiting photographs and paintings depicting homosexual activity. A federal statute may be passed prohibiting a citizen from falsely shouting fire in a crowded theater. He talks about music. The IRS may issue a regulation prohibiting the publication of a book explaining how to cheat on your taxes. That is in reference to Peter Schiff's dad. And then Congress may pass a statute prohibiting flag burning. So if you have this idea that there is something called objective law, that is the law to be followed, well, then you're already falling into something. It is as dumb as saying follow the science or follow the history. There is no one objective thing that everyone knows. Even if it is objective, all you have with regard to the state are fallible, imperfect judges trying to interpret something who are just as biased as anyone else you know. So this really demystifies the state in such a way that I think is terrific, just as your Ryan Dawson thing at the beginning about asking someone that question, putting the onus on them, I thought was excellent.
Let me hop in there because I actually also had this section written down as well. The one part I thought that was really great, and I'm glad you brought that excerpt up because I used a different one, is with the example he gives with the professor, the law professor, who gives his students two different options, and then he shows how both of those options, a court could come to the conclusion that either one of those rulings would be legally sound, which just goes to show how much bullshit the whole operation is. In other words, you can justify anything, and this goes back to what you often hear, like, after the police murder somebody, they'll say, well, a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich if he really wanted to. So the law is just whatever the hell these people want it to be. And I think that he does a really great job of showing that in this chapter. One quote that I really love, and it just sort of sums it all up. He says, at the end of giving this example, he says exactly that any logically sound argument can be found for any legal conclusion. So if that's the case, then any legal conclusion must inherently be bullshit.
Exactly. Even something like, all right, murder. That's really simple. I think we all know what that is. Unjust killing. Well, certainly politicians and soldiers and police officers engage in this routinely. All states throughout all of history, including now. How are they not inside of a jail cell? Like, that makes no sense if you actually believe the myth. But when you understand reality, not so much. It reminds me of Curtis Yarvin's excellent discussion of the California Supreme Court. He goes, it's an amazing thing happened. The California Supreme Court noticed in the Constitution that gay marriage is the law of the land. The Constitution hadn't changed. It took them hundreds of years to figure out something that was right in front of them. Well, there is no objective analysis. There's just judges who are literally render a legal opinion, as Bob Murphy says in Chaos Theory so eloquently.
Well, exactly, and even more than that. Like, if you think just a simple case of murder, a simple case of homicide, forget about like constitutional cases or like jurisprudence. A simple case of homicide could be self-defense if you have the right lawyer. Ask Johnny Cochran. So it's just completely, or it could be self-defense if the judge had a good day, or if he went to high school with you or something like that. And there's so many different things that go into it. The last of which is this whole concept of a rule of law, which is just completely obliterated in this chapter, which I was not familiar with this guy or his work. And I'm really glad that Mal's put this in here, because now I'm going to like really take a deep dive into Haznaz.
Oh, dude, he wrote another one called The Obviousness of Anarchy, and it's equally as good as this. It's just as much of a red pill. Yeah, it's called The Obviousness of Anarchy, Wisconsin Law Review. I will make sure to put that in the notes. Pete, third biggest takeaway from the Anarchist Handbook.
Okay, this is from Kropotkin's The Conquest of Bread, and the mitigated individualism of the collectivist system certainly could not maintain itself alongside a partial communism. The socialization of land and the instruments of production. A new form of property requires a new form of remuneration. A new method of production cannot exist side by side with the old forms of consumption any more than it can adapt itself to the old forms of political organization. The wage system arises out of the individual ownership of the land and the instruments of labor. It was the necessary condition for the development of capitalist production and will perish with it in spite of the attempt to disguise it as profit sharing. And basically what he's talking about with profit sharing is you're getting paid a wage. You're a business owner and you're paying someone a wage. The common possession of the instruments of labor must necessarily bring with it the enjoyment of the fruits of common labor. We hold further that communism is not only desirable, but that existing societies founded on individualism are inevitably impelled in the direction of communism. My takeaway from that is that it almost seems like somebody read that and decided that that's how they were going to design the 20th century and quote unquote capitalism. And I mean, just everything is funneling itself towards collectivism. And I mean, he saw it, he wrote about it, and I don't know if he's a prophet or I don't know if someone read it and said, okay, we're going to do this. But man, that killed me when I read that. I was like absolutely floored. I love reading this left stuff. It's just
me too.
It's eye-opening. It's eye-opening.
Yeah, my next three are from Bakunin. So in 1867, he wrote, In the final reckoning, the people state so strongly, commended by Marx, and the aristocratic monarch state maintained with as much cleverness as the power by Bismarck are completely identical by the nature of their objective at home as well as in foreign affairs. So in 1867, he was able to see that the 1905, 1917 revolutions in the Soviet Union would have been equally as tyrannical as the Bismarck, the monarchy, the King Georges of the world, as anything else. There is so much wisdom in that statement. If you look at AOC made a 2-minute video saying, here's everything I've done during my time in Congress in 2 years alone. One of the things she said is, we pressured Facebook on fact-checking political advertising and exposed Mark Zuckerberg's dinner with radical right-wing figures. So social media is too far to the right, first of all. But second of all, look at how we've already granted the state the right to regulate, the right to keep us safe, the right to make sure, you know, good things happen. So we have the SEC keeping our money safe. We have the Federal Reserve stopping inflation from ever occurring. Well, it logically leads to, you know, they need to regulate speech. So speech is in the best interest of everyone. Once you grant the state the right to rule, whether it's Marx or Bismarck, you're going to get tyranny. Bakunin saw it in 1867. Fucking idiots don't see it today. And it's pretty incredible. And then towards the end of this page, he says, people will have to watch carefully over the good administration of the national land by the state, which just reminded me of Thaddeus Russell's great line. Yeah, the thing about democracy is it's too much goddamn work. Imagine everyone getting totally informed on every single vote all the time. You'd have no time to talk about anything else. So that was my third big takeaway, and it was from Bakunin.
And what's funny is that that blowhard that Gene Epstein has, what's his name?
Ben Burgess.
Richard Wolff. He is so adamant about, if we don't have meetings, you want to eliminate meetings. It's like, dude, I have been in the corporate world for my whole life. I would, if I could friggin' anthropomorphize a meeting and put a bullet in the back of its head, I would. Meetings just suck. I mean, come on.
I remember you and I spoke like right after, you know, businesses started shutting down in like March of 2020. And you, I think you said to me, yeah, we're finally going to realize which meetings could have been emails. So like you just so passively said it as though like I could tell there was so much rage behind it. And I go, yes.
Yeah, you have no idea.
On the clock meetings, love them. When they're off the clock, let's strategize. Oh, I get tired just thinking about them. Sal the Agorist, next takeaway from the Anarchist Handbook by Michael Malice.
Yeah, actually, before I even get into it, what struck me when you were talking is the similarity between that and the chapter with Benjamin Tucker, right? Because Tucker writes about state socialism. Where do I have it here? State socialism versus anarchy, but he thinks it's like more. He's like it's almost like a libertarian socialism kind of thing that Tucker's got going on. So it's not really our version of libertarianism, but he sort of makes a similar distinction that Bakunin does. Bakunin says, well, anarcho-communism versus Marxism, and here's Tucker saying state socialism versus socialism. So it's a very similar sort of argument, and it's also note how like it took place. Like Tucker comes 20, 30, 40 years after Bakunin wrote that, something like that. So, and then Goldman goes on later in the 20s. She writes about the same thing. So this is, like I said earlier, this is still going on to this day, this debate amongst leftists. And even, I would even throw the Agorists in there as well. But, and that's a good segue into my next one, who I had was Leo Tolstoy, which is, I absolutely love Tolstoy. I am the biggest Tolstoy fan. I just love him. All of his stuff is so amazing. It's just so great. And the way he's just able to see so clearly through some of this shit is just mind-boggling to me. I almost feel like he's like one of like these like prophets. Like he's like almost like a holy man, the way this guy speaks and the way he writes. And not just even in this. I mean, there's some great quotes in this selection, but all of his other stuff, like, and that I told you guys I'm working on a book. It's very similar to this one. It's like taking selections and shit. I took selections from Tolstoy from Letters to a Hindu, I mean, this stuff is just, I mean, it's mind-boggling. I just can't recommend to people to read Tolstoy as much as possible. I really think in the long run, and I'll get to my quote in a second, is just that Tolstoy identified the right strategy. Gandhi perfected it, and then Rothbard, Konkin, and Per Byland sort of systematized it and put it into like a mathematical system. I guess that's the best way I could describe my own personal views. But he's got some great quotes in here. I mean, you can really just pick at random with Tolstoy. That's just how he writes. I guess some of my favorites are... Let me just find one. He says, the great thing for people to do... I'm sorry. The evil that they do is that... Oh, I'm sorry. I got the wrong chapter here.
You know, all of them get so mixed up. There's so much info. It is like drinking out of a fire hose.
Yeah, give me 1 second here. There's a good one though.
Okay, Pete, biggest takeaway, fourth biggest takeaway, or third, whatever.
Okay, all right. I have to go with Voltairine de Cleyre because I think most people don't know who she is, but if you read some of her apologetics, I mean, she steelmans every argument to the point where she was debating like socialists and communists, and they'd be like, well, we agree. Okay, so we agree at this point. And then she's like, oh, no, hold on. And then she continues and just absolutely destroys their argument. But I found this to be absolutely amazing. And this is from Anarchism and American Traditions, 1909. She says, the American tradition was the isolation of the states as far as possible. Said they, we have won our liberties by hard sacrifice and struggle unto death. We wish now to be let alone and let others alone, that our principles may have time for trial, that we may become accustomed to the exercise of our rights, that we may be kept free from the contaminating influence of European gauds, pageants, distinctions. So richly did they esteem the absence of these that they could in all fervor write, we shall see multiplied instances of Europeans coming to America, but no man living will ever see an instance of an American removing to settle in Europe and continuing there. Alas, in less than 100 years, the highest aim of a daughter of the Revolution was and is to buy a castle, a title, and rotten lord with the money wrung from American servitude, and the commercial interests of America are seeking a world empire. In the earlier days of the revolt and subsequent independence, it appeared that the manifest destiny of America was to be an agricultural people, exchanging foodstuffs and raw materials for manufactured articles. And in those days it was written, we shall be virtuous as long as agriculture is our principal object, which will be the case as long as there remain vacant lands in any part of America. When we get piled upon one another in large cities, as in America, we shall become corrupt as in Europe and go to eating one another as they do there, which we are doing because of the inevitable development of commerce and manufacture and the concomitant development of strong government. And the parallel prophecy is likewise fulfilled. If ever this vast country is brought under a single government, it will be one of the most extensive corruption, indifferent, and incapable of wholesome care over so wide a spread of surface. There is not upon the face of the earth today a government so utterly and shamelessly corrupt as that of the United States of America. I mean, I want to go back in time just to marry her. I mean, she saw, I mean, in all of that, she saw how cities are just wastelands. She saw that how the American government was going to become an empire. She saw so much, and she's so brutal. I've read a lot of her, and I haven't done. I don't know that there's a Voltairine de Cleyre like expert out there, but I would love to have one on the podcast to talk about her because she is just absolutely, her writings are insane. And like I said, she could steelman an argument better than most people alive right now.
Imagine if she could see where we're at today.
Oh, God.
Oh my God. Yeah.
She'd be making bombs with Louis Lang.
Sal, what is the Tolstoy quote?
Yeah, okay. So sorry about that. I found actually two of them. The first one, this is on the in the Kindle version. This is on page 189. He says, "Why think that non-official people could not arrange their life themselves as well as government people arrange it, not for themselves but for others?" Which is sort of, if these people can't run their own lives, what would make you think that they can run your life? The second quote is on page, this is 192, and he says, quote, "It is said, how can people live without governments, i.e. without violence? But it should, on the contrary, be asked, how can people who are rational live, acknowledging that the vital bond of their social life is violence and not reasonable agreement?" So,
yes.
Again, it's sort of like the same thing there. And I just love it.
Unbelievable.
And then at the end, I don't know, Siri keeps interrupting me. I don't know if she's cutting me off on your end, if you can hear me okay.
No, we can hear you.
I can
Okay.
hear you fine, yeah.
At the end of that chapter, he even goes into a defense of the South for the Civil War. So, I mean, what more can you ask for from a man?
My next one is from Bakunin. He's discussing natural laws in 1870. The great misfortune is that a large number of natural laws already established as such by science remain unknown to the masses. Once they shall have been recognized by science, and then from science by means of an extensive system of popular education and instruction shall have passed into the consciousness of all, the question of liberty will be entirely solved. So from that, I get that our position here is irrefutable. It is true because it's the only one that can be consistently applied. Just as to test a scientific theory, to test a moral theory, you attempt to apply it consistently. Only ours can. So with that, it reminded me so much of what Pete said last time about how it's important for us to sort of have this irrefutable mindset when talking to people that my right is self-evident. I really don't need to explain that much more to you, because every moment you explain to them, you're almost treating them as an equal. When we're not equals, we're totally right. It's good. There's a place for humility. I'm always up to talking to ones that I love, but at some point you have to say, just to be clear, I'm objectively right here. I mean, either you believe in self-ownership or slavery, and only one of those can be consistently scientifically understood. And then I got another one from Bakunin, but I'll sit on that. Sal, what is your next one?
So I have a good quote here from Herbert Spencer, who is just great. Another big fan of his, and I think I get some of that from like Rothbard. I know Rothbard was a big fan of his, but he writes, again on the Kindle version, page 44, he says, "Nay, indeed, we have not seen that government is essentially immoral. Is it not the offspring of evil, bearing about all the marks of its parentage? Does it not exist because crime exists? Is it not strong, or as we say, despotic, when crime is great? Is there not more liberty, that is less government, as crime diminishes? And must not government cease when crime ceases, for very lack of objects on which to perform its function? Not only does magisterial power exist because of evil, but it exists by evil," which I think is just, a lot of times an argument that I like to make to people to try to convince them to see the light is I compare the state to the mafia, and I try to show how it's the exact same institution, just once formalized and institutionalized, ingrained into modern society. And I think that's exactly what Spencer is getting at, right? This whole idea that there's a link between the state and organized crime. And also, of course, I would be amiss not to mention Tom DiLorenzo's book by the same name that makes the same point, Organized Crime. If you haven't read it, you should. But yeah, I thought Herbert Spencer was great. This was a great selection. The guy's a great writer, and he does a great job here making the case.
He's terrific. Yeah, the right to ignore the state. Both Rothbard and Hoppe said that was just incredible work, and it's in both of their anarcho-capitalist bibliographies. Pete, next big takeaway from the Anarchist Handbook.
All right. Once again, I'm going to be repeating a whole huge section here. It's chapter 14 by Alexander Berkman called Prisons and Crime. And this section just really spoke to me. It says, punishment as a social institution has its origin in two sources. First, in the assumption that man is a free moral agent and consequently responsible for his demeanor, so far as is supposed to be compos mentis, and second, in the spirit of revenge or retaliation of injury, waiving for the present. The debatable question as to man's free agency, let us analyze the second source. And he really goes into the spirit of revenge here, and this is some really good stuff. The spirit of revenge is a purely animal proclivity, primarily manifesting itself where comparative physical development is combined with a certain degree of intelligence. Primitive man is compelled by the conditions of the environment to take the law into his own hands, so to speak. I love that, so to speak, because when I read it, I read it in Hoppe's voice. It was amazing. In furtherance of his instinctive desire of self-assertion or protection in coping with the animal or human aggressor who is wont to injure or jeopardize his person or his interests. This proclivity, born of the instinct of self-preservation and developed in the battle of existence and supremacy, has become, with uncivilized man, a second instinct almost as potent in its vitality as the source it primarily developed from, and occasionally even transcending the same in its ferocity and conquering for the moment the diktats of self-preservation. Even animals possess the spirit of revenge, the ingenious methods frequently adopted by elephants in captivity in avenging themselves upon some particularly hectoring spectator, as well known. Dogs and various other animals also often manifest a spirit of revenge, but it is with man, at certain stages of his intellectual development, that the spirit of revenge reaches its most profound character. Among barbaric and semi-civilized races, the practice of personally avenging one's wrongs, actual or imaginary, I think that's really important, actual or imaginary, plays an all-important role in the life of the individual. With them, revenge is the most vital matter, often attaining the character of religious fanaticism, the holy duty of avenging a particularly flagrant injury descending from father to son, from generation to generation, until the insult is extirpated with the blood of the offender or his progeny. Whole tribes have often combined in assisting one of their members to avenge the death of a relative upon a hostile neighbor, and it is always the special privilege of the wrong to give the death blow to the offender. I mean, I think that anyone who's read, Bob Murphy's books on what prisons would look like, how we really wouldn't have prisons. I mean, it would just be restitution and everything. That section right there was probably like the hardest thing for me to read, because it really goes to show how when somebody commits a crime, no matter how small, people just want blood, and that's not what should be done. It should be restitution. It should be that person making sure that that whoever they damaged is made whole. Sure, there are certain circumstances in which somebody's probably going to have to be sent to an island or dropped out of a helicopter, but that's going to be so rare. It's going to be so rare. I mean, it's just going to be about restitution. And man, when I read that floored me. That floored me, because I've talked with Thaddeus Russell about that too before, about the want for revenge, and especially in the prison system of the United States. And it's just barbaric. It's barbaric. There's nothing to say that we have a civilization when we have the prison system we have right now is a lie. It's a lie.
Yeah.
Even the whole concept just of punishing people for deterrence, I find sort of crazy, right? It's like, if I steal $5 from you, then you can get me for the $5 and any, opportunity lost and recovery fees, but that's it, right? So if you say, all right, well, you took the $5 and, it ended up costing me $8 total, but just to make sure you don't do it again, we're going to take $20 from you. Now, at that point, you become the offender, right? That's what the legal system does, is it turns the victim into the offender. That's the worst part about it.
Yeah.
My final point was from Bakunin again. He said, human science is always and necessarily imperfect. So while science exists objectively, our knowledge of it is constantly very shortcoming, just as history is objective. There are things that happened, things that did not happen. We need to be very humble with regard to our understanding. That is something the vast majority of people today are not able to appreciate. They just call it the science based on whatever scientists are currently saying. He goes on to say something unbelievable on page 80. This was written in 1870. A society which should obey legislation emanating from a scientific academy, not because it understood itself the rational character of this legislation, in which case the existence of an academy would become useless, but because this legislation emanating from the academy was imposed in the name of a science which it venerated without comprehending such a society, would be a society not of men, but of brutes. The people calling themselves oh so scientific could not care less about the evidence. That's why I was with the What's Happening gentleman, Shane, and we took the Tom Woods quiz where you can clearly see whether or not masks, mandates, and lockdowns led to better results. They didn't, and the idiots don't care. Finally, it would be a second edition of those missions in Paraguay, which submitted so long to the government of the Jesuits, it would surely and rapidly descend to the lowest stage of idiocy. How in 1870 did he know that a scientific, motivated government would actually lead to a bunch of people being total idiots? Well, he obviously explained his logic briefly there, but for him to have that foresight is unbelievable. And, the biggest red flag of an idiot is, I follow the law. I follow the science. I believe in history. Well, you're just talking about a subject. You're not actually making a case for anything. It's anti-scientific to say, I blindly believe in authority. The purpose of science is to question the current authority and form a hypothesis and actually have reasons based on observation, not blindly listen to authority. The absence of science, which, again, it was so incredible. He got that in 1870. Sal, any final takeaways from the book?
Yeah. I want to read one more quote for you guys. But isn't it interesting what you just read from Bakunin could have been taken from a Rand Paul speech today?
Exactly.
Isn't that's just how cockeyed the whole political spectrum is today.
1870.
Crazy. So this is the last one I want to share this one with you guys because it's so incredibly powerful, and I think it's just an excellent summary. I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but this is again from Tolstoy, and he's answering the question: how do we get from A to B? How do we create a libertarian society or a free society? He doesn't, obviously the word libertarian is not around. Keep in mind, all right, now, and so like as an agorist, me reading this is just perfect. It's beautiful. He says, in order not to do the evil which produces misery for himself and for his brothers, he should, first of all, neither willingly nor under compulsion take any part in governmental activity, and should, therefore, be neither a soldier, nor a field marshal, nor a minister of state, nor a tax collector, nor a witness, nor an alderman, nor a juryman, nor a governor, nor a member of parliament, nor, in fact, hold any office connected with violence. That is one thing. Secondly, such a man should not voluntarily pay taxes to governments, either directly or indirectly. Nor should he accept money collected by taxes, as salary or pension, as a reward. Nor should he make use of governmental institutions supported by taxes, collected by violence from the people. And then he goes on to, towards the end of Tolstoy's life, he became a Georgist, so he goes on to spout off some commie bullshit there, but that's sort of like a hallmark of these early leftists. Like I said, they were in the pre-Rothbardian era, so they can't get everything right. But up to that point, he does wonderful. And I think that his influence on Gandhi and Konkin and so many others, and also Thoreau, you could throw in there. It's just so Gandhi's basically read Tolstoy and said, all right, this is my plan to break the British Empire, and it worked. So. Pretty heavy stuff.
Pete, final takeaways from the Anarchist Handbook organized by Michael Malice.
I mean, one of the things that Malice has always said is that the right libertarians and anarchists who just absolutely dismiss left anarchism are just oh, this doesn't exist. No, that's where it came from. I mean, that's
Yeah.
Now we can
Exactly.
say that, oh, it doesn't, it doesn't play well. It's not going to happen, and that it can't work. But one of the things that we did in our documentary, The Monopoly on Violence, was we gave the left anarchists their due. And something Tom Wood said to me after he saw it was, he said, if this would have been made from the left, they wouldn't have given us their due, our due. It wouldn't have happened. And so we were happy to do it, but we just have to understand our history. And you read, it's like, I mean, I've been studying Marx now for a solid year with, done tons of podcasts with Bird. And we say that, even Hoppe says Marx got 90% right.
Yeah.
It's just, when it came to the praxis to put it into, it just didn't work. And I still think that in 90% you can find gold. You can find things that will actually be beneficial to you, things that you can use. And I mean, I found that in Lenin. When I read State and Revolution by Lenin, I was like, holy, this is like written by Rothbard. It just comes, like, when it comes down to like the last part, I mean, the dialectic is Rothbardian. I mean, he had to read, I think that Rothbard read tons of Lenin, and he gets down to it and it's just like, it's a different conclusion and everything. So, I mean, Emma Goldman, I mean, I've learned so much from reading Emma Goldman, and I quote, like, some of the stuff that I quote all the time is just straight from Emma Goldman, especially when it comes to foreign policy, things like that. You just pick what you need to. There's some gold in there. Just pick what you need to, use it, give them credit and everything, and maybe people will start to see that, maybe they just saw that how horrible the beginning of the Industrial Revolution was, and factory conditions. They were just like, well, this is capitalism, and they were just mistaken. They just needed to see how things would improve, and how things would get better over time. But I mean, even Emma Goldman came back from the USSR after the revolution and said, I mean, this is absolutely insane, and that any kind of socialism has to be voluntary. So even she said it herself. And I mean, she was as hardcore and had no problem with building bombs, but even though she didn't want it, and she didn't want that in her publications and everything. But
I love how in a book that includes Spooner, Rothbard, Friedman, the Tannehills, and Michael Malice, we pretty much just picked the leftists because we're still able to learn from the leftists. We didn't even mention Rothbard and Spooner and David Friedman and the Tannehills are also in here. So if you haven't gotten it, I promise this is an excellent introduction. One of the final things that I took away was chapter 10. It's page 135, Louis Ling. And he basically responds to the court who's, found him guilty of being a co-conspirator in this bomb throwing that took place in a union meeting. Now, again, total leftist, refers to his friends as comrades, whatever. The point is, from this, you can take, it's amazing how likable he is, even though I hate everything he stands for. So what I got from that is he's completely unapologetic and crystal clear as to where he stands, something I would kill for a number of LP members to be, and people on our team in general. He's extremely in their face. This is in the court, directly in front of the judges, the policemen. He calls he accuses like half of the court of perjury. He calls the attorneys perjurers, and it's totally against popular opinion. So much courage is this guy, and he goes, well, if I don't regard your law as legitimate, I don't even reject this building as legitimate, but if you're going to kill me, kill me. And I'm like, oh my God, that is just such a great analysis to have of the world around you, because at least you're being a human being, having feelings and being able to see things as they are. I think it was Ezra Pound who said, even if you're in a war about to die, it's still important, assuming that the war is based on a lie, as most are, it's still important, even minutes away from death, that the war you were sent to die in was a lie, because you will die like a human being, not die like an animal. Now, I don't know if I'd tell the soldier that in his last minutes, but the point is that live life and really make the most of your faculties like this guy does in 3 pages, says words that live longer than most anything that a lot of other people will say. What I got from this is my next question is, how do we raise the cost of being a statist? They feel very comfortable in their ideas, whether they're totally right or totally wrong. They don't bear any cost. Sal, any ideas on how we could raise the price of being a statist emotionally, logically, and therefore create a disincentive for people to engage in things because we already know we haven't beat logically?
Well, I think that they're making it more expensive to be a statist without any help from us whatsoever. So if we just, by nature of them inflating the currency away, they're making life only more difficult for themselves, right? It's the agorists and the anarchists who are, I save in gold and silver, so they can inflate all they want. It doesn't affect my savings, right? My medium of exchange is in cryptocurrency, so they can inflate away. It doesn't make a difference. They think about in the cities, right? All of the regulations and stuff. It disproportionately affects Black people, but it's not because of any like ultra racist conspiracy or anything. It's because they're voting for more statist solutions. Right? They're imposing gun control, the Democrats and the leftists in the urban areas, Black or white, Chinese, whatever, they're imposing these regulations on themselves. So they're going to make it more expensive to be a statist if we don't do anything at all. And by virtue of us doing the right thing, it becomes cheaper to do the right thing. And we, of course, set a better example and hopefully create some flow from the statist to the non-statist position. But yeah.
Excellent ideas. Pete, any ideas on how to raise the cost of being a slavery advocate?
I don't know, man. I've just come to the conclusion recently that if you are going to be an advocate against slavery, against this government, against all of it, probably the best thing that you can do is accept the fact that they may kill you over it. And once you get past that fear of death, that person coming up behind you and putting a bullet in your brain, you can pretty much talk about whatever you want.
Oh, yeah. So liberating.
I think that's the most important thing. I can't, when all this COVID stuff, I went back and listened to an episode that myself and Monica Perez did in February of 2020, and it was amazing. God, she killed me because I had forgotten how much she predicted of all of this. But I remember listening to it, and I'm listening to it back, and I'm going, yeah, I mean, basically the best thing that's happened to me in the last 15 months is that I've just been like, I'm going to say whatever I want. And if they kill me, I don't care. And I just don't care anymore. And yeah, that's one of the problems that I have with like, the Libertarian Party and everything like that. And, I mean, and honestly, I have not, my agorist roots are right there. I mean, I fucking love agorism. I've been doing it my whole life. And there are agorists out there who are just like, well, we have to be careful of what we say and everything like that. And it's like, I mean, I remember when the United Airlines had like the 2-year-old that they were trying to force a mask on and everything. They threw him off the plane. And I was like, and I just went on Twitter and said, it would really suck if some of those planes on the tarmac got set on fire or something like that and everything. And like some agorist just came up, someone with with a black and gray flag came and said,
defending corporations.
Well, we'll fucking kill you if you and I'm like, oh, dude, you just don't get it, man. You just don't fucking get it. It's like, I mean, and that's one of the things about, I don't know if you guys heard, did you hear when Tom did the whole week with Gary Chartier?
No, but he's been on my show, and Gary's great.
Yeah, I've had Gary on too, and he's like, and Tom's like, well, what is the left libertarian? It's like, well, we're not going to bow to corporations. We look at corporations with as much distrust as we look as the government and everything. And that's when an agorist tells me, that United Airlines needs to be defended for trying to mask up a fucking 2-year-old. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe we just set on fire some planes on, send a little message and everything like that. Come on,
dude, the punishment in Ancapistan for child abuse is going to be something like that. Some of your stuff's getting lit on fire, and that's what they're doing. So this has nothing to do with, well, do you think the government? Forget that. It's child abuse, man.
Yeah, seriously. It's like, in the last 15 months, I look at everything that's happened. It's changed my life so much. It's changed my thinking so much. But when I'm out in public now, and I see a friggin' kid, a toddler with a mask on, I want to beat the ever-loving shit out of that kid's parents.
Yeah.
And believe me, and if I killed them, I'd sleep fine that night. Come on. It's a fucking, these kids are going to be scarred for the rest of their lives.
It's like they think that they're defending a private corporation, right? That's the argument that they think they're making. Like, I'm defending private interests. He's criticizing private interests versus state interests. That's what they're thinking to themselves. But they don't realize that these corporations are just the private wing of a fascist regime, right? So you're not, the way Konkin put it was that there's a difference between a corporation and a joint stock company. A corporation exists by state charter, and a joint stock company exists by virtue of its members coming to an agreement. So if you want to form a corporation and you're watching this, don't. Instead, form a joint stock company and remain consistent with the non-aggression principle. Everything would be solved if you did that. Also, again, to that point about the airlines, because you're so right. If they didn't take that bailout money from, like, what was it, 2 years ago now? Yeah. A year, 3 years ago. If they didn't take that bailout money, they never would have gotten away with treating people like that, because there would have been competition, and they never would have ever would have been able to afford to treat people that way. So yeah, it's not like you are not defending private companies by defending a fascist regime.
Private companies enforcing Fauci state edicts. Please.
It's a private company, bro.
Do we even need to go on,
bro?
It's like the idiots. It's like the idiots who tell me the Federal Reserve is private and think that they're making a valid point. I want to finish the discussion by talking about something Vin Armani was talking about on Twitter. So a talisman is defined as an object marked with magic signs and believed to confer on its bearer supernatural powers or protection, something that appears apparently to have magical powers. So Vin says, the masks are a religious ritual, no different in essential form to ancient Jews smearing lamb's blood on their door so gods will pass over their homes and kill people in other households. The specific talisman has simply been updated for modern times, hashtag the dim age. And then Pete had actually asked him, Vin, how do you talk to, someone who's as crazy as this? And he said, you don't fight it, you redirect it. You must give them another competing talisman to love more. Gentlemen, starting with Sal the Agorist, any ideas on how, instead of telling people, hey, the thing you love called the state, it's actually a really bad thing, so you by extension are kind of bad for supporting it. What if we just redirected that energy into something a little more productive? Sal, any ideas on how we could do that?
Yeah, agorism. I've been pushing that for a long time for that exact reason. But isn't it interesting that little quote that you just gave about like the Jews painting lamb's blood over their door to make sure God doesn't smite them or whatever? That's probably more effective than wearing a mask and preventing coronavirus. Because if you wear a mask, you're increasing the likelihood of getting sick. Whereas if you smear lamb's blood over your door, God isn't going to smite you. So it actually makes more sense the old way of doing things. But what was the original question? I'm sorry.
How do we take people's love for this thing called the state, where they find their meaning and purpose in, and how do we replace that with something more beneficial, so we simply don't have the thing called socialism or statism to fight against?
So what I think here, and again, go back to agorism, is entrepreneurship. Get a side hustle. Build it up. Find something you're passionate about. It's something that you can put your interest in. If you can mix in some counter-economic activity, wonderful. A great, simple way to do that is just accept cryptocurrency. So if you're a taxidermist, you can turn that into a counter-economic business by accepting crypto as payment. So entrepreneurship, find something you're passionate about, and hopefully you can do so in a disruptive way.
Pete, any ideas on refining a replacement talisman for the slavery advocates of the world?
Man, culture is so important. I mean, it really is to my family, coming from having a Puerto Rican background and everything. My family still lives in Puerto Rico up on a mountain. They still have chickens running around the yard and everything like that. I mean, I think that family is incredibly important. I think that
Yes.
when you compare, when you start talking to people about, and this is a conversation that I've had this weekend, is talking about how people are like, oh, the nuclear family is so important. And I used to think that as well. And then from talking to Thaddeus Russell, Thaddeus is like, no, it's the extended family. And when you really think about that, it's like, when I was growing up, you had my uncle was living with my grandmother. So we had 2 generations and everything. And I would go down there and it would be 3 generations in a home. And there were 3 generations who were influencing me. And I mean, I just think that if you concentrate on family over these people, I mean, do you think these people love you more than your uncle, than your father? Why are you putting so much faith in them? Then it's just, no one's going to argue that. No one's going to argue that at all. I mean, and it's just a great jumping off point where you can start talking to people more about, localism or, agorism. Yeah. I mean, it's just, I mean, libertarians, and, this is something I had to learn. It's not something that I've always talked about. I mean, I started my podcast in 2017 and I eschewed the culture wars for so long. But I mean, culture is so important to so many people, and it's such an easy language to speak to people, and especially if you're just talking about family. I mean, come on, who's going to deny their family?
I've had a lot of success, Pete, using that sort of line of thinking and like talking to people, especially about like the more like emotional political issues, like when they start talking about abortion and stuff like that. And you remind them that there's more important ways to figure these things out, right? You can figure these things out at the family level before you need to take it to some congressional committee to determine if some girl needs an abortion or something. I like to tell people, like, what abortion is something that should be decided around the family dinner table and not the dinner table of some Senate, committee, like I said, or something like that. And that really seems to strike a chord with people both on the right and the left.
Excellent ideas. One thing that I've had is explaining to them the concept of specialization and the division of labor without using those terms ever, because they will scare people away. So-and-so will be like, a great carpenter, like unbelievable. You wouldn't imagine the talent these people have, or painters. Okay, he's the best carpenter. I know a close second. He'd be like, I'm trying to get into politics and stuff. And I go, oh, Jesus Christ. What are you doing? He goes, I try to watch the news. I go, okay, no, we got to talk. That's really bad. I said, dude, you are so good at creating houses that people need to live in. One of the greatest gifts ever, man. That is your contribution. You don't need to know how to make computers and how to make microphones and how to make printers. You specialize in what you do best and trade for the rest, man, and spend the rest of that time with your family and loved ones. And that is what I try and do, because people need that meaning. So you explain to them, you already have the meaning. So please don't go and find it in Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pence. The worst methods of finding meaning. Friends, family, of course, it's just unbelievable and rather addicting. One of the things to sort of de-shallow some friendships, there's a great book by Gregory Stock, PhD, called The Book of Questions. Free PDF you can find online anywhere. But if you have some money to throw away, it's $3.88 on Amazon to get a used copy. It's like 250 questions or so. They're so thought-provoking. Any family member that you go, hey, I love doing these. Let's just do a couple. It will be the greatest conversation starter to really get to know people and have fulfilling relationships, so they won't have that emptiness. So when Kamala Harris comes along and says, there's a meaning in your life called women's rights, and we're fighting against the racist patriarchy. Well, that is like offering, a drug addict meth. Almost always they're going to say yes. So The Book of Questions by Gregory Stock, PhD, will be in the description below, along with The Obviousness of Anarchy and a link to The Anarchist Handbook by Michael Malice. Pete Quinones, A Free Man Beyond the Wall. Sal the Agorist, thank you so much for your time, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.